Hello everyone, Pastor Howie here. Another edition of Readings and Thoughts from the Scriptures. And in this video we come to the end of Acts chapter 15. And in Acts chapter 15 we've seen all kinds of different things. The council at Jerusalem, the return of Barnabas and Barnabas and Paul to Antioch, carrying with them a letter, the first epistle, if you will, that we know of in the New Testament, the epistle from the Jerusalem church to the Gentiles. And now we come to the end, and we come to a sad note in, a sad note in the history of the Apostle Paul and Barnabas, because in the last few verses, 36 through 41, that we'll read here in a moment, there's a disagreement between Paul and Barnabas. And that disagreement causes them to part ways. There's nothing in there that says there's anger, but that the disagreement was such that they could not walk together in mission, at least at this time. And so let's read this, because at this point, the rest of the book of Acts is essentially about the history of the Apostle Paul and his travels. So what we have here in verse 36 is sometime later, so they're in Antioch, where they were originally sent from on their first missionary journey, where they had lots of success as well as lots of challenges, but they stuck together and they made it back to Antioch, Syrian Antioch, and reported to the church, then went to Jerusalem, because people from Jerusalem came and said that Gentile converts should be circumcised and follow the laws. And so a council was held and a decision was made that no blocks should be put between the Gentiles coming to faith in the gospel of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, especially the imposing of the Old Covenant law on these New Covenant Christians. And then a letter was drafted. They went back to Syrian Antioch. So sometime later, after they went, again, we don't know how long, could have been a few months, could have been maybe a couple of years. There's no real data on how long that time period was. Sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, "Let's go back and visit the believers in all the towns where we preached the word of the Lord and see how they are doing." So, good idea. And Paul wanted to see how they're doing. I'm sure Barnabas was interested as well. But verse 37 tells us that Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them. But Paul did not think it wise to take him, because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. So we read about that. There was nothing said there about any disagreement. It was just that John Mark left them and returned to Syria. So we don't know why he did that. Although I have a suspicion, and I can't confirm it. I can only tell you that I sort of believe that John Mark recognized that what they were doing by word of mouth, using the Old Testament scriptures, would have been or could have been enhanced if they had a document to take with them that had the story of Jesus. I believe that John Mark wrote the Gospel of Mark, the second of the four Gospels in our Bibles. Most scholars believe it's the first of the Gospels. There are some who dispute that, but classically most people believe it was the first of the Gospels. It was placed second in the canon because of the size of Matthew's Gospel and the fact that Matthew was an apostle. Mark was not an apostle. He wrote essentially what we believe are the memoirs of Peter, who was still in Jerusalem. And so John Mark perhaps got it into his head that a document could have been written, which we now call and know as the Gospel of Mark. That's what I believe. I can't prove it. Nobody knows exactly why he went back, but I just speculate that might be the reason, because even though, as we read through this, we read in chapter 15 of Acts, verse 39 now, they had, that is, Paul and Barnabas, had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord. We were introduced to Silas in the last video. He was one of the emissaries from the Jerusalem church that went with Paul and Barnabas to deliver the letter to the Gentiles that had been drafted at the end of that council. And he stayed, we're told he stayed in Antioch for some time. And then sometime later, Paul and Barnabas have this disagreement, and so Barnabas takes John, still sees value in John Mark, and takes him with him back to Cyprus. They did go to Cyprus in their first missionary journey, but Paul chose Silas and was commended and left, and was commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. So he followed on his second missionary journey back into what is now southern Turkey, but through Syria. So it was a land journey. Barnabas and John Mark took ship and went across to the island of Cyprus. They part company. We don't hear much in the book of Acts about Barnabas anymore, except in the letters of the Apostle Paul, we know that Paul commended Barnabas and that Paul found value in John Mark and John Mark's work. And that tells me again that perhaps Paul found out that Mark wrote this gospel, the memoirs of Peter, and he certainly found value in that. And Peter himself found value in the letters of Paul. Peter talks about the Apostle Paul in 2 Peter and says that his letters are as valuable as the other scriptures. So this is what we have. And this happens. There was a disagreement, a different idea. It was a sharp disagreement, but apparently they decided to disagree agreeably, and the ultimate result was that the gospel went two places. Sometimes that happens. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It is a thing that happened. And there is evidence in the scriptures that they were reconciled together and remained friends and found value in each other. So that's the important thing. And so that's what I have for you in this video. Till next time, may God bless you wherever God leads you, especially in your relationships. And if there's disagreements, may they be agreeable disagreements and further the course of the gospel.